Okay, so we are going to do a demonstration of the NetCadCam system using the container labs as our virtual testbed. So what I have already going on here is I've got three containers representing a core and two access devices. So those exist. And then if I want to take the NetCad tool and show you, these are the designs that the NetCad system knows about. And that's based on a config file that I'm not gonna kind of delve into at the moment. But we're gonna be focused on this one, building one, floor one. So the kind of the narrative here is kind of like a little campus network. It's a toy network. It's not meant to be like representative of, quote, the real world, but just for demonstration purposes, I hope it's useful. So by default, if you set up an environment variable called netcad design, then this will be the one used by default. So I don't have to keep typing in the design I want to use. But I could do this. I could say netcad show devices. And here it's saying in design B1 F1, I have these three devices. Now you'll note that it actually says 4 devices. So if I do -- all, what this is showing me is that in my design, there is an access point that is based on a Meraki MR84 model, and its profile is called a floor access point, and it's virtual, meaning it's not really in the physical world, but I'm using it as part of my design because I want to kind of represent the connectivity between devices and how VLANs are associated, and we'll get into that in just a minute. So, so part of this design tool is that you can represent things that don't really exist in the real world for design reasons. So we can look at that. We can say, netcad show cabling, for example. This will show you that these devices on these interfaces are connected in a specific way, and you can see that on the first access switch on port 1, it's connected to the wired interface on the access point here. And then you can also see how the core devices are cabled to the access devices. Now, if I want to take this design and produce the automatic set of checks, I can say netcad build checks. And what this is going to do is it's going to essentially generate really what amounts to be a collection of JSON files that basically say what what the system needs to check. And then I can say netcam check. And it will use those files to go out, touch the devices, run all of the checks that it needs. And we can see that right now the design as it is matches up to the real world of our container labs. And this gives you a couple of things right off the bat. Checking 3 actual devices. There are 58 checkpoints. It took less than a second to do, and you can kind of see the high level results. Now we can show the checks for a particular device, say core 01. And if you just hit return here, it's not going to show you anything because by default it's meant to show you the things that failed. But if I want to get a brief listing of what was tested, I can see that these are the checks that correspond to the different design services that this particular design uses. And this design service really uses 2 design services, topology and VLANs. So device interface cabling IP adders are part of the topology design service, and VLANs and switch ports are part of the VLANs design service. Now, there's another one that's missing here. There's a couple that are actually missing here because the design doesn't use it. Because there are no transceivers, there are no transceiver design checks, but in the real world, if you had transceivers, it would actually check that the transceivers that are in your design actually are in the real world, which is really helpful for finding misplaced transceivers, or somebody plugged in the wrong reach transceiver. They plugged in a long reach versus a short reach, that kind of thing. And then I can also show the results. For example, if we wanted to look at the results for a specific check, we could say just show me switch ports. And again, it's only going to show you the things that are failed. So if I do -- all, it's going to show you these are all the checks that passed and the results of those things. So on core 1 on Ethernet 2, we're expected to see this particular native VLAN and this particular 300 and 301, and this is what we got. So this is kind of capturing the state of the network and showing you how it represents to the real world. So now let's kind of mess things up, right? Let's say that I have this, let's do netcad show cabling. And so we can see, this is the expected cabling. And again, if I did netcam show checks for, say, checks on cabling for, say, the device core 0111, nothing wrong. If we do all, we can see that, on Ethernet 1, it says we're expecting ACC01. This is the device name, and then port 7, and this is what we actually got. We can see that it matches. Now, I'm going to change the design because it's easier to change the design than to kind of rewire a virtual lab. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up my design, and I'm going to change my design so that rather than using Ethernet 7 and 8 for the access switches, and this is part of the design files, which I'm not going to go into in depth on this video. Let's just say that I want to change 7 and 8 to 6 and 7. Okay, so I just made that one little change. And now if I do netcad show cabling, what we'll see is that this now says, well, let's see, I need to make this go deployment. I need to deploy this up to my virtual lab. So normally this goes pretty quick. It's just logging into my remote server to get this connected up. So just give me a minute here. Let's try it again. Deployment, upload. Okay, I think it got uploaded. Okay, so here we can see that the design has changed. Now, the first thing that I have to do, now that the design has changed, I have to rebuild the check. So I could say netcad build checks. Oops, I have to spell it right. So now it's rebuilt these checks, and if I do a netcam check, we are going to see a whole bunch of failures, partly because the cabling has failed, but also because of the cabling and the way that the VLAN services works, what is expected on the various interfaces has also changed. So now if I look at, say, core 01 and said netcam show checks for device core 01 and just hit return here, it's going to show me that these are failures. So on the interfaces, it says interface 2 has an expected description that failed. And so it is expecting port 6. You can see like this is port 6 is kind of the way the system is automatically creating interface descriptions, just as choices as a designer. And what we've measured is Ethernet 8. And same with Ethernet 4, it's expecting Ethernet 6, and what it's measuring is Ethernet 8. These are the two interfaces on the access ports that it's connected to, and that's the one that I changed. And then also on the cabling, it's showing us here on Ethernet 2, it's expected to see Ethernet 6, but it's seeing Ethernet 8. And so, we're seeing the mismatch of cabling, right? Now, if I were to look at some of the other failures on this particular device, summary, and then I want to do brief, sorry. We can see that there are these interfaces and this cabling. Okay, so that's what failed there. And if I want to look at another device, let's say I want to look at ACC, this is our access, we can see that we have interfaces and cabling, but we also have VLANs and switch ports that are failing. So if I were to look at the NetCad, and I wanted to show the switch ports for this device. So by design, what are we doing on the switch ports for ACC01? This is saying that we have Ethernet 1, it's connected to the access point using what's called a peering trunk, which means it's just going to use whatever VLANs the access point is using. So this is kind of a peering trunk. And it's expecting VLANs 300 and 301. And then 6 and 7 are uplink trunks. And what that profile says to the system is, any VLAN that I'm using, then I want to put on this interface. So because Ethernet 1 is peering to the access point, and is kind of consuming or getting these from that device, 300, 301, it's placing those on the trunk here, 4, 6, and 7. Now, if we look at the actual results, for the checks on device ACC01, and let's look at brief again. And if we look at just the switch ports, so let's just say, show me the checks for switch ports. What this is saying is that Ethernet 6 currently is configured as an access port, and we expect it as a trunk port. Right, so that's kind of a difference because, again, we just kind of switched up our design to use, Ethernet 6 when it's not really even being used at all. So I'm going to put this back to 8. Make sure it got uploaded. Okay, good. And then I'm going to NetCad build my checks again. And then I'm going to NetCam check. And now since I put it back, everything should be fine. Now I could go onto a device and make a change, and then we could actually see that change happen. Like, for example, if I wanted to log into a device, let's say I'm going to log in as admin on Core 01. And let's just say I configured a new VLAN. So these are the VLANs that are there. And let's say, I'm going to make a VLAN, VLAN 200. And then I'm going to say name is Jeremy Test. Right. Okay. So now if I run these checks again, what we're going to find is there's a failure on VLANs on Core 01. And if I do show netcam show checks for Core 01, it's going to tell us that by default we're checking for the exclusive list of VLANs, and we see that VLAN 200 is not expected to be on this device, and so it's telling us there's a VLAN that doesn't belong. And so we can control whether or not we want to do exclusive checks or non-exclusive checks. For example, in this case we're doing exclusive checks on VLANs. So I'm going to remove that VLAN. So I'm going to take it back off. Oops. Get that right. And just say no VLAN 200. Okay. And then we can run our checks again. Oops. Actually run the checks. Check. All right. So everything's fine. Now, let's say I want to make a change to the design itself. So what I'm going to do is in this particular design, I'm going to create a standard design. This is for the B1 F1, building 1 F1. And now what I want to do is I want to add some desk ports to a given switch, so ACC02. Now, if I did NetCad show interfaces for device ACC02, what this is going to show me is these are the interfaces that are being used. So I can see that only 7 and 8 are being used. This is the port type, so these are a virtual interface. And here I haven't even said what type of interface management 0 is. So this is a warning in my design saying, hey, you forgot to do something here. It's not hurting anything, but it's basically telling me that I didn't define what type of port management 0 is using. No harm, no foul. I can also say, show me the unused ports. Just by way of example, these are the ports that we're not using on this device. Or I could say, show me all the ports. And we can see that, these are being unused. Now, what I want to do is I actually want to use some of these ports. So in this design, which I've commented out, I'm going to uncomment this out. And this is basically saying add some desk ports and then set up some, recompute the VLAN interfaces for this design. And this add desk ports really is just saying, from this design, I'm going to set my interfaces, Ethernet 1, 2, and 3 to be desk users. And these are what are called port profiles or interface profiles, which again, I'm not going to go into in this video, but in another one I will. But essentially what these do is they say, I'm going to use a particular VLAN and I'm going to set a particular interface description. And we can check that now. we can see that now we see Bob, Alice, and John are going to be desk users. And if I were to then rebuild my checks and then rerun my checks, I'm going to see a whole bunch of failures because I haven't really deployed this change, right? This is basically saying there are inconsistencies here. And if I look at ACC02, again, if I said netcam show checks for ACC02, this is basically going to tell me where all these inconsistencies are. So first and foremost, it's basically telling me I have a whole bunch of interfaces that in the design is supposed to be used, but in reality they're not used because these interfaces are turned off. Right, so 1, 2, and 3 are all kind of showing that they should be used, but they're not currently being used. And on the switch ports, this is saying that Ethernet 1, 2, and 3, they should be configured with VLAN 200 because that's the VLAN associated to desk ports in my design. And currently they're just set to use VLAN 1 by default. And then these are the trunk ports. These trunk ports, before they weren't passing any VLANs, so they're none actually right now. There's no allowed VLANs on those trunk ports, and we expect to see VLAN 200, right? So I've changed my design, and now I, what one would do is they would, make a configuration change perhaps, and so I can do that to make some of these errors go away. So let's say that I did netcad build configs. And this is going to automatically generate configs based on my design. Now, again, like I said in the intro, you don't have to use NetCadCam to build your configs, but in this case, I am doing that. And so now if I look at the configs for ACC02, what I'm going to see is some VLAN. This VLAN is here, for example. And if I look at these interfaces, I can see that these interfaces have been created. So just really quickly, I could update the configs, and then we can see these design errors or these check errors go away. So let's do that. Now, just to make copying and pasting easier, I'm going to rebuild these in another window, build configs, and I'm going to say ACC01. No, I want to do 2, sorry. Okay. So let's SSH to ACC02. And see if we see, okay, so we don't have the VLAN we expect, so we need VLAN 200. So let's just pop that on there, config, paste. And then let's go to interface 1. Interface 1, let's just do one of them. So here's interface 1, and int 1, pop that there. And then we need to go down to our trunking ports because now we can see that these trunk ports have been configured, whereas if I were to do show run interface Ethernet 7, for example, right now they're set to none because the design wasn't using it. So let's copy and paste these two things. Okay, so I did one interface and a little bit of config change. So if I ran netcam check, and let's just do a check on just that device, which we can do. So we're just going to run the checks on that one device. Now we can see we still have some failures, but maybe not all the failures that we thought we were going to have. So we can do like show checks. So I expect we're going to have Ethernet 2 and 3 still reporting, right? Because we didn't change those. And then on VLANs, VLAN 2 says, oh, VLAN 2 should be on ports 1, 2, 3, 7, and 8. But it's not on 2 and 3. That's because we didn't provision Ethernet ports 2 and 3. So if I wanted to go back and kind of fix all that, I would then just take Ethernet ports 2 and 3 here. Oops. Let's do ACC02. Right. And plop that in. And now if I do netcam check, again, we'll just do ACCO2. And now we can see that, all of the config changes that were then required to ensure that the operational state matched our design, we've actually made those changes and everything is working there as we expect. So I know this ran a bit long, but hopefully that gives you kind of an idea of what NetCadCam is doing. I will probably make another video that goes more in depth in the design files. The design files are available in a GitHub repo, which I will share a URL to at the bottom of this video. So hope this kind of made a little bit of sense and kind of demonstrated some of the topics and ideas that I've been going for. All right, thank you.